They say the greatest danger to a soul is not a sudden fall, but a slow, willing descent. That the most profound corruption begins not with a scream, but with a sigh of relief. We bargain for lighter burdens. We ask for easier paths. We never ask what currency the road accepts, or what waits for us at the journey's end. This is not a story about demons. It is a story about a hunger that wears a scholar's face. A story about a young man who, to escape a father's dream, made a pact with a famine that had been waiting centuries to be fed. My name is Eleanor Vance. I do not trust quiet study halls. I cannot bear the smell of old paper and dust. This is why. In the autumn of 2016, I was a postgraduate student of archival science at the University of York. My world was vellum and footnotes. My younger brother, Oliver, was the brilliant one. Our father was a vicar in a dwindling parish, a man who preached a gospel of mercy, but lived one of quiet, relentless expectation. Oliver was to be a doctor, the redemption our father's faith could never provide. Oliver was bright, but brittle. The pressure was a bell jar. He shared that bell jar with his two closest friends, Thomas, a quiet genius from Whitby, and Ben. The change began with Ben. Not with a bang, but a whisper. Missed calls. Erratic texts. The rain here tastes like old ink. Then silence. We found him in his family's flat in York's medieval quarter. His pupils were pinpricks in a jaundiced yellow. He sniffed the air constantly, wetly. "Can you smell it, Ollie?" he rasped. "The ink. It's not ink. It's marrow." His mother found him in the Roman cellar, scraping mortar into his mouth. When she grabbed him, he threw her with impossible strength. He didn't speak. He hissed, a sound like steam from a sealed tomb. After that, he was confined. The room stank of wet clay and decayed parchment. His veins were black, tracing strange, angular patterns on his skin, like illuminated letters from a forbidden text. When Thomas entered, Ben's reaction stopped my heart. He ceased his pacing, shuffled forward, knelt, pressed his forehead to the floorboards in abject submission. Thomas adjusted his glasses, a faint, distant smile on his lips, as if confirming a hypothesis. Ben's family called their vicar. Reverend Clark promised to return at noon with the full rites. That night, Ben laughed from behind his door. A dry, rustling sound. "The good Reverend is reading," he cackled. "In the Minster Library. In the restricted section." At dawn, Reverend Clark was found in a carrel in the Minster's undercroft. A book open before him. His face frozen in transcendent terror. A cerebral hemorrhage. The page was blank. Ben died 3 hours later, coughing up a tar that smelled of ozone and rot. Our family shattered. Oliver retreated into a silence so deep it was a sound. My father, I remember him once, the night after Ben's funeral. He found Oliver staring blankly at a textbook. Instead of another lecture, my father simply put a hand on his shoulder, his own eyes hollow. "Just try, son," he'd whispered, his voice cracking. "Please." It was the closest he ever came to an apology, and it only made the cage feel more real. Then I found Oliver. It was past midnight, a rhythmic, wet scraping from the kitchen. He was crouched on the floor. In his hands was one of my father's old, leather-bound theological journals. He wasn't reading it. He was licking the pages, long, slow strokes dissolving the ink. He turned. His chin glistened with black saliva. "It's sharper this way, Ellie," he whispered, his voice a perfect, horrible mimicry. The words cut deeper on the tongue. The Oliver I knew was buried. What emerged was a scribble of a person. He spoke in a guttural, angular tongue, Old English but wrong. He contorted his limbs into impossible, geometric shapes. He covered every surface with the same intricate indigo patterns that mapped his veins. They weren't letters. They were bindings. And every time Thomas came to our door, the thing wearing my brother would cease its frantic scripture. It would crawl to a corner, assume a fetal position, and let out a low, continuous whine, the sound of a beaten dog that knows the whip. We were desperate. We found a cleric from a forgotten Anglo-Catholic order in Durham, Brother Aldhelm. Ancient, skin like parchment, eyes the color of cold ash. As he crossed our threshold, Oliver's head snapped up. A voice like grinding millstones erupted. "This threshold is writ in water, old scribe. Your cross is a dry quill." Brother Aldhelm did not flinch. He began the rites, his Latin a sharp, percussive recitation, a language of law. He pressed a plain, iron stylus to Oliver's forehead. My brother shrieked, and the confession was torn from him, a pact. Oliver and Ben, drowning, had sought a contextual reassignment from a reclusive Bidlayan archivist. Thomas had merely pointed the way. The entity confessed Thomas was the key, a conduit. We wept, apologizing to a stoic Thomas. Brother Aldhelm seemed to succeed. Oliver collapsed, spent and lucid. He wept in my arms. For 1 hour, we knew hope. Brother Aldhelm returned. His ash-colored eyes held a finality that froze my blood. "The entity lied," he said, his voice dry as tomb dust. "They are plagiarists, thieves of truth. I have consulted the Liber, Obsidianalis. The truth is not a pact, but a predation." He told us of a hunger, a scholastic glut, a Codex Vorax. It feeds not on flesh, but on potential, on the unmade future, the unredeemed promise. It starves in certainty, but thrives in the soil of pressure and disappointment. The archivist was a custodian, a keeper of the feast. Thomas, the brilliant one, was the prime text. The glut was feeding on Ben and Oliver, but it was studying Thomas. Consuming their potential was the preparation. Thomas's own brilliant future was the main course. The bowing, the whining, it was the glut's annotation. Thomas was the living book it was preparing to devour. We begged him to save Oliver. The old monk's face was a monument of sorrow. I can sequester the entity, but the text of your brother's life, the pages have been eaten. The words are gone. Only the binding remains. He re-entered the room. There was no battle of shouts. A silent, vicious debate. Oliver's body twisted into a pained, scholarly argument. The footnote is consumed. The chapter is void. Brother Aldhelm spoke a single word. The sound of a library door closing for the last time. He produced a lead-lined book clasp, ancient and cold. He pressed it to Oliver's chest. And from my brother's mouth poured a torrent of shadows in the shape of letters, of half-formed equations, of musical notes that died unheard, a stream of stolen futures. They screamed into the clasp with the sound of 1,000,000 pages being torn. He snapped it shut. Oliver lived a week in hospital. Catastrophic systemic atrophy, they said, as if his body simply forgot how to live. Thomas visited constantly, a model of grief. In Oliver's final moments of clarity, he looked at him and sobbed, "I just didn't want to let him down, Tom. I just didn't want to study." Then he was gone. A sigh. A closed book. But the story does not end with a burial. Thomas got his place at Oxford. A full scholarship. His first paper was hailed as revolutionary. Last month, at the Bodleian, I catalogued a new donation. A private collection. The centerpiece was a terrible codex. The Liber de Futuris Consumptus. Its binding was a leather that made my soul cold. Its pages were thin, translucent vellum. Written upon them, in that familiar, anguished indigo ink, were biographies. Ben's. Oliver's. Their dreams, their fears, scored through by a ravenous editor's pen. The final chapter was not yet written. But the heading was inscribed, glistening wetly as if the ink was still fresh. Subject, Thomas Armitage. Thesis, A Life of Brilliance. Status, in preparation. And tucked into the folio, like a placeholder, was a single, perfect lock of auburn hair. This is the story of the voracious Codex. It is not a demon story. It is an erasure. The most profound evil does not shout heresies in the square. It whispers suggestions in the library. It twists aspiration into appetite, knowledge into consumption, and a father's love into a recipe for annihilation. It mistakes a soul for a source to be cited and then devoured. So listen closely. If you are ever offered a shortcut through the sacred dark of your own striving, if the pressure to become something curdles into a taste for dust and forgotten words, if you feel the quiet, scholarly attention of something that believes your future is simply a meal to be prepared, burn the page. Some hungers are not for flesh, but for the light that was never allowed to shine. And some libraries are not houses of knowledge, but larders for a famine that has always hated the dawn. If you have a story that haunts you, send it to contact.thedreadcodex@gmail.com. Your truth becomes our tale. Your likes and comments keep these stories alive. Until next time, may your path be lit. May your faith be your own. Good night.